expecting high performance is no longer an option. In the information age, mediocrity doesn't stand a chance, and this means individuals, teams, leaders, and organizations need to deliberately focus towards improving their current status quo. This would mean aligning teams to conform to their high performance standards, working together to continuously develop themselves, overcoming their dysfunctions, and managing conflicts head on. This is what I discussed with Vinaya Murlidharan during this podcast. She is a coach at Fiserv in Pune and leads one of their delivery transformation teams. I have known Vinaya for a while and I have enjoyed reading about her work and listening to her talks around organization behavior, philosophy, and politics. And she has helped so many teams on their path towards high performance that I couldn't have had a better guest to talk about this topic. So, welcome everyone as I speak with her about the fundamentals of building high performance teams and how you, the listeners, can make a difference. I am your host Vishal Prasad, and this is Enterprise Joy, educating organizations to be awesome. Welcome everyone to one more episode of Enterprise Joy. Today I have Vinaya with me and we are going to speak about building high performance teams. And before we go ahead, for the listeners, whoever celebrates Eid, today is Eid. So Eid Mubarak everyone. I think this has been a nice week. We had Friendships Day two days back and we have Raksha Bandhan 2 days later. So yeah, happy festive weekend for everyone. But back to the show with high performance team. Vinaya, welcome.
Thanks, Vishal. Great to be here.
So, uh, I do understand that you have been part of building loads of high performance teams, and I know that because uh, I have read about a lot of your work. So let's dive right into it. What is high performance for you?
All right. So, one, concepts like high performance and many such ambiguous concepts, I find that it's easy for me to articulate them and think about them and have some kind of an approach for those kinds of ideas if I have these sort of tethering spots or big anchors for me to build my narrative around. So I would share those. It's not meant to be a comprehensive definition of what high performance is for me, but big ideas that I have in the high performance space. So one is high performance to me is about creating and delivering something that is of high value for whoever is going to derive the value of it, and doing it at with very high quality, with very high rigor and discipline, and doing it at high speed, such that it stays relevant and it is timely, but also do it in a way that is sustainable. So it's not something that's a flash in the pan and it happens, maybe once in a while. It's something that is bankable, that's a little consistent. So it has to be a sustainable way of creating high value at high speed with high quality. But also, in addition to this, I would talk about doing it in a way that is giving us joy and we have fun along the way. I read somewhere that discipline without fun or engagement is drudgery, and I do believe that. So I think doing all of this while having fun is a pretty big thing for me. So very briefly, that would be what I would think of when I think of high performance.
Okay. I mean, I so agree with what you say. That so I read somewhere, I don't remember the name of the person, but we discussed it just last in the last episode that a team that does not have fun when they are doing things, that's pretty much a sign of mediocrity. So you do need to have fun. How was that? So the everything that you said about speed, about having this high performance definition for yourself. One thing that I have found difficult for myself is even to come up with a definition. I mean, it keeps on changing with time. One day it's one and the other. The other problem that I have faced is to actually define it for teams. So,
Mhm.
although I wouldn't define it for teams, but for just teams to define it for themselves, it does take time and it is difficult process because you have so many people and there are so many different mindsets. So, how difficult has it been for you to take, let's say, your definition of high performance and then take this to your teams and then it becomes their definition and then they take it forward? How have you done it in the past?
I think that's a really good question. It's so difficult to define for yourself. Taking that idea and having others buy into it is even more difficult, or even for them to set it up for themselves, right?
Mhm.
So I would say that one, my space is mostly agile, so I spend a lot of time in the agile arena. And the way I described high performance has a lot of overlap with the way I describe agility as well, to be honest, right?
Mhm.
So when I think of agility, I think of doing the right things of high value, doing it the right way with high quality, doing it fast, such that we can get quick feedback, we can be responsive, and to be able to keep doing it over and over again so that it is sustainable, right? So, a lot of similarities between the way I think of agility and the way I think of high performance.
Mhm.
So, I do find myself talking about that quite a bit. I also love talking about vibrant workspaces, and that's like a key word for me because when I think vibrant workspaces, it conjures up this image which
Mhm.
then I'm able to share with others as well. So I'm thinking of people working with a lot of excitement, with a high sense of ownership, working beyond their defined boundaries of their roles, doing excellent creative collaborative work, having points of view and defending and standing up for them, those sorts of things. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of vibrancy I enjoy at work. So I would say that while I don't think I've been very good at taking my idea of high performance to my teams, if I look
Mhm.
at 100 little conversations I've had over a course of period, then and I aggregate it, then my idea of high performance gets conveyed. But your question does make me think whether I should be a little more explicit and deliberate about talking about high performance. So this is something I'll take back from our chat.
Mhm. Cool. Okay, so I'll tell you. So the thing about, let's say, high speed for high performance, or sustainability, even quality for that matter. The way it works for me is if I'm doing something by myself. Okay, let's say I'm doing a piece of work. Let's take this podcast for example, and
Mhm.
I will have my own definitions of what high quality is, and what sustainability is, or what beauty is when it comes to something aesthetic. And when I'm doing something, I can evaluate myself later and say, okay, I did something that was good, that was top notch, and stuff like that. But that is
Mhm.
all in my head, and I wouldn't have a need to actually go and, let's say, write something on a wall and say, hey, this is
Right.
exactly what's supposed to be. I will have some goals, but they are still slightly different. Uh, but then if I just want to, like, measure myself as to how I delivered something, once I've
Mhm.
completed, I'll just say in my head, okay, yeah, this was good, or this could have been
Yeah.
better.
Mhm.
That's not the same with teams, however. So when you have teams and you have so many different people, uh, unless you have like this common definition of, for example, quality or sustainability, once a piece of work is delivered, everyone will point it to in a different way. This is like, let's say, people pointing to different parts of an elephant and everyone giving a different definition.
Right.
Having the common definition becomes highly important. Have you, or rather, what do you usually do in your workplace to arrive at this common definition? Do you have some techniques that you utilize?
A great question, not an easy question. So one, I enjoy a lot of diversity of thought, to be honest, and I like to encourage it. I quite like that everybody probably has their own definition of high performance as a starting point, right?
Mhm.
And while I wouldn't really be looking to homogenize all of that of how people think, I think an exchange of ideas is something that I do value quite a bit. And exchanging ideas, the ideas can be infectious, people can get influenced by it immediately. Some ideas are more like slow cooking, so they take time to take root and all that. But the exchange of ideas through that, I think hoping for some alignment is a good way to go about it for me.
Mhm.
But let me get into a bit of a metaphor, and it's a really odd metaphor. I think I hope it'll land well. So I like the idea of some amount of alignment while leaving a lot of space for movement and autonomy and emergence and all of those things. So how do I create that alignment? Is I like presenting some of the values, some of the principles, like these big rocks that are somewhere in the distance. You can see them clearly, they're there, they're in your peripheral vision,
Mhm.
but you're still a little away from it because it's
Mhm.
still a very ambiguous and intangible sort of concept.
Mhm.
But then I like to sort of tie little threads from those rocks to the points where people are. And that actually is tying it to their day to day behaviors, their day to day practices, and the way they interact with each other. So let's say one of the values we really want on our teams, and the team also sort of buys into that at some low sort of level, is let's say it's openness, right?
Mhm.
So tying a little thread to say what is openness going to look like for us in our day to day, when we are coding, when we are having meetings, when we are retrospecting, when we're doing all of these things, what does openness need to look like? What is that manifestation? I think that starts making those big rock ideas a little more real, a little more tangible. It's a thread that people can hold on to
Mhm.
and sort of start pulling themselves towards the rocks. So I've found that I love talking about values and principles and philosophies, but the teams have a limited appetite for it on a day-to-day basis, right? On the day-to-day basis, they want to talk about
Mhm.
things that can improve today. So making that connection really helps. And then gradually pulling them closer to the values. So it becomes a little more clear. They're closer to those big rocks. The edges start becoming less blurry and all that. So I like to present the values, yes, but I find that if I talk too much about it, I start losing the teams. So I like to quickly connect it to their day to day work and
Mhm.
then use that as a way of bringing them closer and closer to the values and the principles and the buy in that they need to that. So I know that was a very complicated metaphor. Possibly, I hope you visualized what I did.
No, I
Uh,
so yeah, I can visualize because I do quite a lot similar. So I'm a values and principles guy myself,
uh,
and yeah, that's what I would do. So I think it's important for even the listeners to know we use values and principles very much interchangeably a lot of the times, but there is a difference, right? So your values are nothing but your belief systems. It's something that you believe in, whereas the principles are these rules that you note down for yourself.
right.
So if I'm just to put it in a very generic context, um, obeying laws or abiding laws, law abiding
Mhm.
citizen, that's pretty much a value or a belief that you have. That's your belief system that you have learned growing up. But if I
Mhm.
want to align that with a principle, that's a rule. One of the rules can
Mhm.
be, since I follow laws, I will, let's say, stop at a red light. So stopping at a
Uh-huh.
red light is the rule or the principle, and that's basically being derived from your values. And
True.
yeah, I agree with you, it becomes extremely important. So what I have done in the past, and what is challenging as well, is to bring all these people in a room and make
Mhm.
them brainstorm on what are your common values that you want as a team. And since
Mhm.
everyone comes from this different background and different belief systems, they have different values. A lot of the values are organization values as well, and pretty much most of them are aligned with it. uh, but then you
Mhm.
have some personal values. And
Mhm.
what I try to do is at least come with the common set that everyone agrees with. Like, okay, this is a value that my team definitely wants. For example, you mentioned openness. Let's say there's one value that says focus. And when I say
Mhm.
focus, I'm simply saying, hey, I'm concentrating on something that I have to do and I don't want to be disturbed at that time. So if focus is a value, having these do not disturb moments become like a principle. And the
Right.
implication for that would be, hey, this is a do not disturb time, so we don't schedule any meetings at this time. Even if it's the CEO of the organization, I'm just going to do my work and stuff like that. I know it sounds very ridiculous when I say that, but that's what it stands for. But yeah, so let's say that we do have the values and principles and everything. How does that
Mhm.
span out for you? Where do you take it from there?
So, like I said, I think I find that the values and principles. So people find it easy to agree to those at conceptual level.
Mhm.
Like, for example, if we talk about openness again or focus, right? Like you mentioned. So, in theory, people find it very easy to buy into it and say, "Yeah, we buy into that, we value it, and all of that." The principles, you're right. I think put some guardrails around it. and it helps them. It becomes like this decoder ring, that if this is the value, what is the behavior I need? The principles are the decoder ring
Right.
in between. That serves a big purpose. I do find that the principles are tougher to get buy-in to, because it starts making its rules,
They
right?
are
To
rules.
some.
Yeah. You have to follow them.
So yeah, I think that's a little more difficult to establish, but it is important to establish so that we can make it a little more real.
Mhm.
But after that, I still find that, going to a more granular level, talking about, hey, remember, this is a value we all said we agreed to. These are the rules we all agreed to. Come on, guys, it's that sort of thing. So do you think this behavior fits in with that? And
Mhm.
over there, I think there are more gray areas. I
Mhm.
don't think it is as black and white. And I also don't believe that's the way people operate.
Mhm.
So while traffic rules is something that we do kind of loosely follow, right? In India, we don't even follow the traffic
Oh
rules
yeah.
very
Let's
strictly.
not go there.
Right.
No.
So, yeah. But I think the values and the principles, and then the behaviors, that's like a wide space.
Mhm.
There are so many manifestations which can still operate within that wide definition of the values and the principles that we have, that we should allow for that variety. So I'm a big believer in allowing for a lot of diversity, variety, because I find that we cannot set rules for everything, right? Everything's
Mhm.
going to emerge as just way too dynamic.
Oh
It's
yeah.
a
Yeah.
futile exercise. So I think over there, that's where I think the autonomy needs to kick in. Where if we do a good job in the alignment, then I think the autonomy will take care of a lot of things on the ground. But constant reminders and making those things visible, it should be kind of in their face, the values,
Mhm.
principles.
Yeah.
I think that keeps them grounded
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
some extent.
Absolutely. I mean, so I've also seen if the values and principles are like clear, and if people have buy-in, then they're not afraid of even coming and asking for certain things. Like, so if they need certain enablers for themselves, for example, they would call it out.
Hmm.
And that maybe, let's say, since I discussed about focus, if someone says focus and do not disturb time, but then there is, let's say, a senior manager who's trying to like get a town hall to be scheduled at that time, people won't be scared to come up and tell you, if you're, let's say, their leader or their manager, or different definitions of managers that we have in the teams
Hmm.
nowadays, to, hey, please go and tell that senior manager not to have a meeting or a town hall at this time, because this is what we need during our focus time. So those things
Correct.
become important. They become your enablers. And even things like, for example, getting licenses sooner and all of those things depends
Hmm.
on what kind of values you have. uh, yeah, I'm just trying to like relate to one value that I again respect and courage. Like, these are, if you have the courage to call out what you want, then for
Hmm.
me that team can do amazing work because they already know what they want. uh,
Right.
I still like to relate this to ultimately outcomes. So when we say that, hey, we want high performance,
Hmm.
when I'm doing this values and principles, I usually pose like a question to the team, and I say, we as a team are a high performing team if, and that if
Hmm.
is basically what leads to, okay, if we have these values, if we have these principles, if we have these things available to us. But that eventually leads to, okay, let's say I give you everything. Now
Hmm.
tell me, what is your results and what are your outcomes? And then the actual
Right.
definition of the outcome comes out, and I would just go and like define that as my high performance, keeping in mind that I still know that it is very difficult to achieve it. So for me, it is, high performance is still a journey. It never ends, because the moment you learn something, you will have something else to reach out to. Uh, but
Absolutely.
having this small outcomes, which I define, or which the
Hmm.
team defines for themselves, this is something that I just take up. Okay, if you are able to do this, you are a high performing team, and
Hmm.
there's no need for me to then even question, is my team high performing? And
Right.
I mean, that's something that I have found like convincing for myself. But
Hmm.
does that work for you? If I don't have like a standard definition, but if the team simply says all of these things, these are our outcomes, are you happy with it? And that is their definition of high performance. Will you be okay with that?
So, one, I think what you mentioned, this is, hidden sort of thing that you are taking for granted, and I think many organizations don't. The fact that high performance may look different for different teams.
Hmm.
So you're allowing them to define it for themselves. I think that in itself it's a really good step. I would imagine they'd be more committed to that definition because they
Absolutely.
are doing.
Yep.
So I think that's awesome. Um, One of the challenges I have faced with teams is that many of the teams that I've started engaging with have long histories, right? They have
Hmm.
had certain ways of working where they're used to being told how to do things. They're
Hmm.
not used to as much autonomy or,
The kind of
freedom to
freedom.
define.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. To define for themselves what the outcomes should be, it's usually driven top down.
Right.
So I find that even, taking that freedom and doing something with it is a bit of a journey. It takes some time
That's
for them
true.
to know how to do
Yep.
that. So over there, I find that sometimes they aim low.
Hmm.
Their definition of high performance is,
Yeah, yeah.
not challenging
I
enough.
get you. So,
Yeah.
like,
So
it cannot be business as usual. It has to be a stretch somewhere. It has to be
exactly.
something more than what you have right now. Yeah.
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
think the role for, roles like coaches or if there are facilitators, uh, there's a role for them to play over there to sort of push the envelope a bit for the team or encourage them, draw them out of their comfort zone a bit. I
Mhm.
think that's needed, or either we do that or we
Mhm.
accept that this is something that's going to evolve soon and we remember to revisit it and keep revising what our definition of high performance is for a team. So
Mhm.
either of the two, but stretching a bit or having very good inspect adapt sort of cycles,
Mhm.
even for what high performance means. I think both of those are needed to help the teams really aim a little high and keep
Yeah. Yeah.
moving
Yeah. So I think if you have something like a high performance defined for your team, then you would want to revisit it at least, let's say, in a quarter or something, and just gauge yourself. Are you there? And if you are there or even close to what you want it to be, has that definition changed? Because yeah,
forward.
you rightly said it cannot be. You have to stretch a little. It has to. It cannot be business as usual. Otherwise, the growth does not come in. That
Absolutely.
actually reminds me. So for me, I can actually use this definition and then carve out the team's way of working as well. So the team can
Mhm.
basically take this and say, okay, for us to achieve this, this is going to be our way of working, and then there will be people who will take certain amount of responsibilities and accountabilities, and then it keeps on growing. But I like the
Mhm.
idea where you mentioned about the teams take time to grow up to that level. So a few teams may be slow, a few maybe fast, and that does bring me a little bit closer towards uh, team stages of development.
Mhm.
But for now, let's focus on at least two things that I'm getting out of whatever we have had a conversation so far is a high performance can be a definition that is defined by the team as long as it is not business as usual. It's a little bit of a stretch. A lot of values and principles that play an important role. So identifying and aligning that becomes important.
Mhm.
But after that, we have to retrospect and we have to keep on evolving because it is more or less a journey and it's not really
Ab-
an end state that we want to achieve. Okay,
Absolutely.
let's do one thing. Since we were on the topic of team development, let's
Mhm.
take a short break. And when we
Okay.
return, let's talk about how this development of teams works and if there are any stages that we can account for. All right.
Awesome.
And listeners, stay tuned. Hey, it's time to give a Patreon shout out to the following Patreon patrons: Sebastian Holscher and David Toborek. Thank you so much for all your support in our quest to help build awesome organizations. We could not do it without you. And for those of you wondering how you might get your own Patreon shout out, well, become our patron on patreon.com/enterprisejoy and support us. So, welcome back, everyone. I'm in conversation with Vinaya, and we have been speaking about building high performance teams. And Vinaya, before we went on break, we spoke about values and principles, enablers, and how we can define high performance like some kind of a charter for our teams. I forgot to
Mhm.
ask you, what is your most important value? for yourself?
Okay. That's a good question. And of course, it makes me think. And my first response, and it's a lot more about, my overall persona, not just about work. I thought of saying tolerance,
Mm-hmm.
allowing for a lot of diversity of thoughts and behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as I think through that a little more, I think I do expect something that's a little more underlying and a little more fundamental than that. Like, having respect for each other, not being a jerk,
Mm-hmm.
and being open and all those things. But if I dig even deeper, I think for me it is really adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure a lot of people think of that as a value, but I think depending on who you find yourself with, or the situations that you find yourself in, or the person that you are at a particular point in time, I think being able to respond to that, I think I value that a lot. I believe in that a lot. I very strongly believe that there's no one size fits all, not
Mm-hmm.
only for different people, but also for different situations. The same person in a different situation
Mm-hmm.
should be able to have a different response. So I believe it's very important for us to have deep, strong roots that keep us, grounded. But it's also important to be able to,
How flexible
the
you
trees
can
are
be.
able to sway in the wind a little
Yeah.
bit. Adaptability. I started with tolerance, I ended at adaptability, but I think with adaptability, a lot of these other things sprout from there. So
Mhm.
I would go with adaptability.
Cool. I mean, yeah, respect, and I think for me, respect and courage will be like two my most important ones.
Hmm.
For the simple thing, I do want to be respectful for everyone around me. I think that will be tied pretty much with tolerance. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, courage important as well for me because I do want to call out things the way they are, be it whether you like listening to it or not. So, like giving you bad news, even if you don't like
Right.
listening. But yeah, for me as well, respect and courage. Okay,
Awesome. Those are, timeless classics. So
timeless classics,
that.
absolutely. Okay, but we did cover a little well. We mentioned about every team can have a different stage of development. So not every team will have the same definition of high performance. They
Mhm.
can derive one for themselves, but they will have some journey for themselves as well. How they develop as a team. How do you
Mhm.
see team development as such?
Right. You're right. Every team has a journey of its own and it all looks different. I haven't yet, in all my experience, come across even just two teams
Hmm.
with whom I've been able to try the same things and have had the same results. So every team looks different. So, one, I think going in expecting that a team's journey is going to be unique to that team is it just frees you up a little bit to, accept that. So that is one. But I would say that a team coming together. So I'm going to use a metaphor of marriage,
Hmm.
and if it starts getting awkward, please stop me. But
No, no, go ahead.
something there.
I,
Let's see.
I like awkward conversations.
Awesome. All right. So think of a young couple that is not yet married. They're just seeing each other. They're putting their best foot forward, and they can do no wrong and everything. It's the honeymoon period, so to speak, right? So
Hmm.
everything's hunky dory, and it's basically people are being nice to each other, right? People are learning to be with each other. They're being nice to each other. So it's that stage.
Hmm.
Um, as a couple gets married, the first few years
Hmm.
can be really rocky because now you're living with that person 24 by 7, and there are little irritants, right? There's a wet towel here and there are dirty dishes there, and somebody's spending too much, somebody's too thrifty. So all sorts of things. So that's a period of settling in where people are really seeing the real person and learning to be with each other.
Hmm.
So that is the second stage. And after that, if you look at a slightly older couple, they've been married for a few years. There is a certain amount of comfort. Um, there are a lot of unspoken cues that you can pick up. You have certain ways of working that are settled, that you can depend on. So there's a level of comfort, companionship, and all that, right? So
Mm,
I'm going to just take it back to a more popular model, which is Tuckman's model, and it's not the marriage metaphor. But Tuckman does talk about, and it's extremely popular, so I'm sure a lot of people
mm,
have heard of. So there is the forming stage of a team when a new team is coming together, and everybody's nice and professional, and staying in the polite sort of conversations and that sort of thing. So they're just learning to come together. Then you have the storming phase, like the young couple, where the wet towels and the money and everything starts becoming a point potentially of conflict.
mm,
But the storming phase is extremely important for the team to be real with each other, to find their strengths, to close their gaps, and really forge themselves into a strong team.
mm,
And then you have this nice period of comfort and companionship, like I said. So that is the norming phase. So things have settled down over there. There is a way of working for the team.
mm,
But going back to the marriage metaphor, maybe it's not enough, right? Maybe you need a little bit of magic, and that takes work. And that is where you have these great marriages. I think it takes work. It takes a desire from all parties to do better than just BAU. So doing things that push you out of your comfort zone a bit, or challenge you to get better. Or maybe you go on a great trip together. Maybe you do date nights, whatever, right? So
mm,
adding some pizzazz into your marriage. And that's where I would go back to Tuckman's model of the fourth stage, which is performing. So you have forming, storming, norming, and performing. And performing is where now we are talking about high performance, right? We're
mm,
talking about a team that is not just doing BAU well, they're excelling, they're flourishing, and they're doing new things, they're continuously improving. That's the kind of thing that I would look for in a great team. A lot of teams get to be decent teams, but the
mm.
great teams do things differently to get there, right?
Right.
So I would just say that that's a way to look at the team development for me.
Mm, yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think thanks for defining 15 years of my relationship. That was not awkward at all. Uh, but yeah, I do admire Tuckman's model. Uh, I do find it a little tricky because the way I see it in my head, with Tuckman, every time, let's say, a team member goes in or out of the team,
Hmm.
you actually go through this entire thing. So it is not very linear as we see in the diagram, right? It's not very
Hmm.
linear. It goes back and forth between different stages.
Right.
And it's very important, or sometimes one does not even identify in which stage we are. So even when the performing part comes in, teams really, they might not even identify that, hey, we are now a performing team. It's just very natural, and it's gone back and forth so many times that it's just evolved over time. Adaptability, I think, yeah, that fits in well over there. So
Hmm.
I do like the shuhari thing.
Hmm.
For listeners, shuhari is this martial arts concept which Alistair Coburn, I really like his work, and he took it as a learning model. So shuhari would simply mean at the shu stage you're at a beginner level, so something similar in Tuckman, let's say you're very new. But in
Hmm.
the beginner stage you would just follow the rules. So you have certain rules defined for yourself and you just keep on following those rules. Then you have the ha, which is, okay, now I've understood the rules, let me try and bend the rules so that they fit my context a bit better. And then finally you have the re, which is like the master of your craft, and you start creating your own rules for yourself. And what I have done in the past is, even with teams, so if I have a team of, let's say, 8 to 9 people, I would create like this big chart for them and put it somewhere on the wall. It sounds very awkward now that I say I put it somewhere on the wall because you're working from home. But yeah, if you're in office somewhere where they're working their space, I'd put this chart on the wall, and the team would just spell out the skills that they have or they need in order to do their work or do their job. And they would just mark like shu, how, re in front of it.
Uh-huh.
And that becomes like this place where people can see what others are good at or what they need help with, and they can either reach out or ask for help for whatever things that they want to grow. And that's how the team grows together. So the entire Tuckman's model of, okay, here we are. If we want to work together and be a norming team or a performing team, this is where we need adjustments. And you can just see that happening very visually. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
However, for this to happen, you need a very trusting team. That's like the caveat. Because you don't want to be
Right.
in a position, let's say, where a person has been reaching out to someone for help, let's say with some concepts of Java.
Yep.
And suddenly, when I put up this Shuhari sheet on the wall, and this person who was reaching out to someone puts themselves as a beginner, whereas this other person says, I'm an intermediate. And
Uh-huh.
that shouldn't be like, oh shit, I was going to some person who is not even there yet. Uh,
Right.
so it becomes important to create that kind of an environment where people feel safe to be open. So if this exercise does happen, I would expect the other person to go and say, are you crazy? You can't even be a beginner. I'm the one who's coming up to you. And they can actually help them switch their levels. But
Right.
trust becomes like this extremely important thing before we get into all of this. Let's talk a little bit about trust. Have you found it difficult with your teams? Because I think that we can go somewhere with this.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see trust?
So trust is a tough one. While it does seem very foundational to a lot of things that we want to see in a team, it is a really tough one. You can have all the right intentions, you can do all the right things that you think are right, and yet trust can be a very slippery thing to catch hold of. Um, and some of the things that I try, which start moving the needle a little bit on the trust meter, so to speak, is trying a lot of transparency. I think that's pretty fundamental to building trust.
Mhm.
So transparency in terms of access to information, having candid conversations, all of that, that sort of thing. So transparency, a lot of frequent communication. I think a lot of mistrust also stems from people speculating and guessing what is really going on, and
Mhm.
communication can be a good counterweight for that.
Mhm.
um, and something that you touched upon, respect, right? I think showing and displaying respect for everybody, right? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a certain title or a position to have respect. You don't have to be a certain age to have respect, right? So I think having respect for everybody and making sure that you display it uniformly, I think that can really help. And openness again, as people start seeing a lot of acts of openness where they feel comfortable sharing ideas, people can share failures, successes, all sorts of things. I think that kind of openness, so trying some of these things could help in building trust. But still, and I would think it's a very long term proposition to build trust, right?
Mhm.
You cannot have people put together in a room and say, hey, now from today we all trust each other. Doesn't really work, unfortunately. If I could just wave a wand and make that happen, I would. But it does take time. And personally, I think as individuals, something that we could think of and try to help move it along is that one, trust is a two-way street, right?
Mhm.
So unless I'm ready to trust the other person, it's not going to be reciprocated. So I could potentially take the first step
Right.
and make it easier to start building that.
Mhm.
But I have found that I do have limitations on that. Unless some reciprocation starts happening,
Mhm.
there is a point of no return where I do personally do reach, and beyond that, I'm not investing anymore in a relationship. So maybe making that period of tolerance a little longer
Mhm.
makes your chances of gaining trust better. But again, as individuals, we could take the first step and remember that it's a two-way street, and we have to trust to be trusted as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, if I want to relate that to, let's say, Patrick Lencioni is the thing where about the five dysfunctions of a team. For him as well, he mentions absence of trust like the first level dysfunction. That is the basis of every other dysfunction that you may have. And he
Mhm.
says the same thing that for trust to build in, you need to be vulnerable to each other. So it is a two-way street. It cannot be one directional. And for that to happen, you have to be open. You have to accept your limitations. You have to reach out for help, or you have to uh, ask for help. And all of these things, they ultimately boil down to what he calls as vulnerability. So if there's vulnerability, then there will be trust. And the way I see it is, for people to be vulnerable, you need to give them a safe environment. Because unless they have a safe environment, that openness does not come in. And we have heard a lot about creating these safe environments, and there are so many different ways of doing it. Uh, how would you do it? If I have to ask you, let's say, if you have to create a safe environment for a team, what will be your strategy or tactic to do it?
Okay, so one, vulnerability is it's tough, especially when you're saying that you're starting with a place where trust is yet to get established, and
Mhm.
that's where we use vulnerability as a way to overcome this lack of trust. It's a pretty difficult thing to do, but like you said, by creating a little more safety, you can make being vulnerable a little more palatable.
Mhm.
Now, I think leaders do shoulder a lot of responsibility. The onus is on the leaders to get this started, get this whole process of showing vulnerability, gaining trust. I think the leaders do play a big role in that. For example, imagine a leader stepping up and saying, to their teams that, hey, this is something I don't know how to do.
Mhm.
That's being vulnerable, or saying, hey, I messed up, I made a mistake here, or saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking, what do you think, would you do it differently? So really opening themselves up for that kind of commentary. I think it's big,
Mhm.
but leaders do have the onus of taking the first steps on that, I would think. And as they do it often, and they do it enough,
Mhm.
and they do it in a very visible way, I think they start becoming role models potentially for their teams,
Mhm.
and they give some others something to emulate, right?
Right.
The other thing could be, trying workshops. There are these safety workshops or trust exercises that you could potentially do to bolster, the effort of the leader on the ground.
Mhm.
um, we could try that. One of the things that we have tried in one of the organizations is, I think people themselves influence their feeling of safety the most, right? Even more than their leaders, more than their peers, more than the organization, they themselves, right?
Mhm.
I can choose sometimes to feel safe or to feel less safe. So I have a lot of influence over it, generally more than what most people believe. So one of the workshops we do is help people identify what are their sources of not feeling safe.
Mhm.
They could be different people in their sphere of operations. It could be the nature of the organization. It could be their lack of skills. So, what contributes to them feeling less safe? So, we help them
Mhm.
identify that first, and then think about what they can do to make each of those areas a little better, right? Just
Right.
start chipping away at it a little bit, but also, take control of their destiny a little more than they are taking right now. So, some of those things help.
Mhm.
The other thing I think in a team setup is, at least for the initial few days, when the team is still not well formed, is making sure that discussions are about topics, they're objective, and they're
Mhm.
not about people and personalities, So when there's no trust,
Mhm.
if we go there too fast, then I think the safety just crumbles away before it's even formed. So I
Right.
think some objectivity in the beginning really helps.
Yeah. I mean, so I do remember. So I had Priya for the second episode. We spoke about motivation. But if when Priya does workshops, I've been to a few workshops that she's conducted. She does this thumb ball exercise in the beginning, where she
Mhm.
has this ball which has a number of questions, and you just have to throw it to one another, and when whichever question is under your right thumb, you have to answer that.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Okay.
I think that's the questions are something like, what's your favorite color, and
Okay.
things which are more personal to you, and you can just share that with the rest of the audience. I think that connect about knowing another person a bit more also helps, because the thing that you said, uh, asking people what's their fear, one of the common things that I have got in the past is the fear of failure. Like, if
Yeah.
I fail, I'll be blamed.
Right.
And it takes time before people can accept, okay, failure is acceptable. And that's, for me, a safe environment is a place where you're allowed to do unsafe work. As long
Yes.
as that is true, people feel safe. But then the place where
Mhm.
you said that it still has to be objective and not personal. If we want to continue on the dysfunctions path, you have the second level, which talks about fear of conflict. And the moment I say conflict, there are people who don't like it, because conflict is not something that we like. We like everything that is nice and cozy. But if I actually see, for us to solve problems and to grow, conflicts are essential. And I totally agree with you that it is important for leaders to address that. Leaders have to be in a position where they can bring up those difficult conversations, they can address the elephant in the room, and they have to allow these conflicting conversations to happen, because that's where
Mhm.
problems get solved. And that's where I think these conversations, as long as they're not personal, as you said, it has to be objective. And I think the leaders can ensure that these conversations are objective. uh,
Mhm.
if you have that, that actually strengthens your relationship a lot more than what it will just be like, hey, we have to be trusting for each other. This exchange of ideas, just knowing people more, and at the same
Mhm.
time solving a problem at hand, that brings in a lot more trust. So for me, conflicts as well, the second level, if I have to say, is if not the same but equally important for anything that you have to do when it comes to building relationships. And yeah, for sure, leaders, yeah, you have to step in.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, conflicts are uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Um, so I would just touch upon the Thomas Gilman model over here briefly. It's a good lens for us through which we can look at what kind of responses we can have to conflict, right? So very,
Mhm.
very briefly. So it talks about, avoidance could be a response. So you avoid conflicts where the conflict stays and doesn't get resolved, but you just, steer clear of it. The other one could be, contending, where you want to win, right? There's a
Mhm.
conflict, you're a party to it, but you want to win. That's what your stance is going in. On the other hand, it could be that you are accommodating. You're saying, I'm going to let the other person win. I'm going to, just give up my point of view. So that's
Mhm.
accommodating, where again, there's a winner and a loser, but you're the loser. Um, one that is it sounds the best is, of course, using collaboration as a way to respond to conflict. That's where you're aiming for consensus to some extent. You're looking for a win-win, in very simple terms. So if as a leader, most of the time, my overwhelming response in most cases to conflict is to drive for collaboration, that
Mhm.
I think that's great. Occasionally, a leader must and will choose other ways. There are times when you'll avoid conflicts and you'll do other things. But I think there can be so many responses to conflict. And sometimes the nature of the organization or the culture of the organization contributes to this. So, just
Mhm.
a quick example, one of the organizations I was with earlier, having heated discussions and passionate debates was just a way we worked, right? So we'd be in a meeting and we are having these heated conversations. And the minute we wrap it up, we're all going out together for tea and we're joking. And, it's very contained to the topic. And it was just so fun to be able to have those kinds of conversations. But I have been in other organizations where the culture of the organization is it's very formal, it's very polite. So over there, if I suddenly I'm the only one having a very passionate discussion, then it could also be offensive, seen as offensive for some of the others. So
Mm.
I think the culture of the organization, but each of us impact the culture of the organization, so we can shape it. But
Yeah,
that's gradual time. But yes, I've worked in all kinds of places,
man.
and
So you talk
yeah,
about meetings. Like, my biggest pet peeve is to have boring meetings. Like, like kill
Right.
me now kind of feelings. I really don't want that. Like having meetings which are engaging is something that I really want. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
if you fear conflict and have this artificial harmony, as you say, then yeah, that's never going to happen.
So true. But the worst is the passive aggressive, right? Where nobody's
Ah.
opposing or having a different point of view, but you have this wall of silence and you're like, am I on mute? And you're just checking those things. Yeah. But I think it also leads very well into the next item that, is in the five dysfunctions of a team, which is lack of commitment.
Yeah,
So, like you mentioned artificial harmony, I think just now, right?
yeah.
And it gives the sense that everybody's agreed and bought into what was discussed because everybody's quiet. And sometimes I hear even myself saying, hey, I'm going to take silence as acceptance.
Ah.
And that just doesn't fly ever, right? Because it's not. So I think it leads a lack of conflict, directly feeds into a lack of commitment
Mhm.
where you think people have bought into a decision, they've bought into an idea, you think everybody's going to go back and just make that magic happen, but they never really had the safety or the confidence to bring up their own ideas and disagree and have place for dissent.
Mhm.
So the buy-in is also low and the commitment is also low.
Right.
And something that leaders can of course do there is to force a little bit of clarity and force a little bit of closure. I do feel sorry for leaders, to be honest. I think they suffer through all of these things as much as team members,
Yeah, but
but they do the way.
I mean, here's the thing. I don't see leaders as like one figure in a team anyway. I mean, leadership is very situational. So depending
Absolutely.
on what you're doing and where you are, every individual can become a leader, and rather they will become leaders. Especially if you're talking about this autonomy,
Yes.
autonomous teams.
Yes.
So it's not to say that hey, there's only one leader in the team and this person is pushing everyone to do things. No, you have leaders who are very much situational and occasional. So I
Absolutely.
think yeah, I'm so when you said about the this like silence is acceptance, there are so many workshops that I remember from my past which have had this small uh, like posted somewhere that says silence means acceptance, so speak up. And I so
Okay.
hate that posted. I mean, I understand the reasoning behind it, that we are pushing people to speak up, but I think
Right.
the facilitator of that workshop has a much bigger role to play, because you have to be skilled enough to bring in that person in the discussion or in the workshop. You can't just expect one post-it to be put up on the wall and people just open
Right.
up because, oh, I see a post-it, I should talk. That never happens. So like the facilitator
Absolutely.
being the leader at that time, yeah, that becomes an important job for them. I totally agree with that. But then I do agree. So since we are going like the level of dysfunctions, the next one is avoidance of accountability. So if you're not committed, then you won't even hold yourself accountable. So there'll be lack of ownership. You wouldn't even take up things to be like your own baby. And
Mm-hmm.
that for me itself brings in this feeling of, if you're not bought in completely, like if you're not committed, then whatever you create later, and if let's say you are the one who everyone is looking up to and you are for some reason not able to do your job, and if I
Mm-hmm.
call out in a meeting that hey, this was supposed to be done by you or your group and blah 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 whatever, and if you don't even own up to it, well then there's something totally wrong over there. And I think just for this one dysfunction, there's so much that we can do, right? So we have reviews in place, we have feedbacks in place, we have retrospectives in place, and there are so many different practices that lay this foundation. And these practices are basically there so that you own up to what you have, and accountability becomes very, very important. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't even have that commitment, then accountability becomes a big question.
Right.
And I want to be in a meeting where I can call out people. Let's say if I have so I work with software development teams, right? And when we talk about quality, quality is the accountability of the development team. And
Mm-hmm.
if our definition of quality is not met, I I will call it out.
Sure.
And I'm lucky to have team members, like development team members, who will say, yes, we slipped, or yes, we are supposed to do it. And that is the
Right.
level of ownership that I'm looking for. And yeah, that for
Mm-hmm.
me is extremely, extremely important.
And do you also find, so I find that creating an environment where peers hold each other accountable,
Oh, yeah.
again, takes a lot of time. Where, if you have somebody with a title, right, you have, I don't know, a facilitator, a scrum master, a manager in the room, then they expect that person to, hold people accountable. But having
Okay.
peers each other accountable, I think that's where it starts becoming more
Yes,
sustainable and repeatable. And I
exactly.
think that's something to
Yeah.
work
I
towards.
mean, you spoke about high performance has to be sustainable, right? So I mean, it shouldn't happen that if a manager is on leave, then the team does not perform. That's not what we are targeting for. If it's a high
Correct.
performance team, it's a high performance team, irrespective who is in the room and who's not. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think this also, if we finish off the five dysfunctions,
Mhm.
so the last one that Patrick Lencioni does talk about is inattention to results.
Mhm.
And I do see this quite a bit because many of our teams are still in flight, and it's a very long sort of journey. So we find that when there's no commitment and there is no accountability, at some level, there is no alignment to what they're trying to achieve. So
Mhm.
there is no attention on the collective results of the group, right?
Right.
We're talking about the functions of a team. So it is about team goals and the team operating together as a very tightly knit unit.
Mhm.
So I do see some inattention to collective results.
Yeah.
And it also manifests itself in people having their individual goals that they are going after, which may sometimes be
Yeah.
in direct conflict with the team goals. And that becomes really odd because then there's this tension, right? People are pulling in very different
Right.
directions. And it can be a very purposeless group. As a team, they can be very purposeless. They do work every day, they're doing tasks, they're doing stuff, but they don't really
Yeah.
achieve much.
I mean, the output will be just mediocre. You don't want that.
Exactly. I think to some extent it can be combated by having more communication about the goals, by
Mhm.
again making the goals a little more visual and visible and in your face. Maybe celebrating small wins, right? That's a way of positive reinforcement, letting people know we are headed in the right direction.
Mhm.
Appreciating, contributions from various team members towards the goal. So, keep reiterating in various ways the fact that we are all tied into one direction and one goal,
Mhm.
and making sure we all headed in that direction.
Yeah.
So
So
those
I think
ways.
even when you say like this, my goal versus the team goals, I think that will be the reason why a lot of the organizations now we understand that team rewards are like much more fruitful than individual incentives or stuff like that. And there are different ways
Right.
of achieving it, obviously. Okay, but okay, for now, let's say that if I do want high performance team,
Hmm.
then addressing these dysfunctions also become very, very important. And whether be it a leader or the team members, it's important that everyone understands how these dysfunctions have to be tackled, and that is a step towards being high performing. uh, I do still want to address a little bit about conflict, since we spoke a little bit about that, and you spoke about TKI also.
Hmm.
Let's discuss that in a bit more detail, because I think that'll be interesting for listeners, just how conflicts are really important in our lives. But let's do that after a short break, because we have been speaking for some time, right? So we'll be back in a short while, and then we speak about conflicts and their importance. If you like what you're hearing, then do subscribe to this podcast for more of Enterprise Joy. You can get a complete list of platforms where this podcast is available on anchor.fm/enterprisejoy or on our website enterprisejoy.com. Folks who prefer more visual experience can save the Enterprise Joy podcast playlist on YouTube. And you can also support this podcast by becoming a patron on patreon.com/enterprisejoy. We are happy to bring great content for you that can help you and your organization be more awesome. Welcome back, everyone. And I'm in conversation with Vinaya. We have been speaking about building high performing teams, and we have discussed so far about how do we define high performance and about team dysfunctions. We are going to deep dive into one of the dysfunctions in this segment. It's fear of conflict, because I believe that's something that we should address, and it is interesting. My question to you, Vinaya, are you scared of conflicts?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm scared or afraid of conflicts, but some conflicts are uncomfortable for sure, right? So they do, shake you up a little bit. But they serve a purpose in helping the teams form and getting better and get to high performance.
Mhm.
Um, so while I wouldn't say I'm afraid of conflicts. I do have different responses to conflicts, and I think we briefly spoke about the Thomas Kilmann model, and
Mhm.
they do talk about the different responses you could have.
Mhm.
And maybe I said it before, but I would reiterate that I think you can and must do things differently at different times.
Mhm.
Uh, I think collaboration as a way of dealing with conflict is wonderful, but
Mhm.
sometimes avoidance is not a bad thing to do as well. The conflict situation.
So why don't you explain the TKI in detail? And then what I would like to know from you is how have you utilized TKI for your own work?
All right. All right. So a little bit about the model before I start, pulling out examples from my experience. So one, the TKI model, a simple version of it to think of is think of two axes. Your x-axis is how much cooperation you plan to bring into your conflict management, and think of your y-axis as how much assertiveness you want to bring into your conflict management. So now you have
Mhm.
this sort of a grid where it's on cooperation and it's on assertiveness. So let's start with the first one, where there is low cooperation and there is low assertiveness.
Mhm.
And that is what avoidance is, right?
Mhm.
So I'm avoiding conflict. I'm not really looking to solve it. So I'm not going out of my way to cooperate and, resolve the conflict.
Right.
I'm also not asserting my position and saying, hey, let's resolve it, my way or anything. So I'm just avoiding the conflict altogether.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say, let me also, maybe talk about the examples as I go along with the model. So, avoidance, one of the examples that I can draw upon is there were a couple of team members we had this big event going on, and there was some miscommunication about some decision, and they ended up, doing very contrary things.
Mhm.
And I think actually headed physically for a conflict. They were like hurtling towards each other. And at that point of time, the decision was so contained in time, it was just relevant for that one event.
Mhm.
um, and it didn't really need to be resolved. It didn't have long term repercussions, etc. It was just an outlet of emotions that was happening over there. Somebody just stepped in and they actually physically steered one of the people away from the other. uh, and it just diffused the situation, to be honest, right? It was not a big conflict that needed to be resolved, etc. So avoidance at that point of time was probably a wise choice. It
Mhm.
didn't have long term impacts that we had to live with later, etc. But then it was just emotional. It was in that moment, and just steering a person away from it as a way of avoiding conflict worked, right? So a lot of people think of avoidance of conflict as this bad thing because it's the lowest quadrant on the model. I would say that as leaders, and you mentioned situational leaders, so I think we should have all the tools in our toolkit and use the one that fits the best,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, I mean,
that's
I can't imagine someone writing a bad variable name and someone coming to hit some other person. I will definitely pull them back.
absolutely right. So that's one. Now let's keep going along the other quadrants that we have, so to speak. It's not really quadrants, but just easy for us to think of it that
Yeah.
way. Let's think of a way of engaging in a conflict where your assertiveness is very high, but you're not so high on the cooperativeness, right?
Mm.
So that's basically when you're in it to win it. So you have a contending stance. So you're saying that, hey, this conflict, we're going to resolve it, and I'm going to, win this. So that's how I enter it. So there's a winner, there's a loser. I want to be the winner. That's how I approach the conflict if I'm one of the parties. Now, this we see from time to time, especially I would say in the case of places where there is expertise is valued a lot, in situations where expertise is valued a lot, then it becomes, a lot of things are on the line. Then you have your professional pride, you have your ego, you want to win it, so all of those things. So I think that can also devolve into something like you call upon your years of experience, you start name dropping. I think while you're going into it trying to win, I've rarely seen that as very constructive, and no one really wins at the end because it festers.
Mm.
Um, at the back of it. But that is a stance that you can take going into a
Mm.
conflict.
I mean,
And on the other end, sorry, go ahead.
I'll actually be happy with, so when it comes to, so the competing aspect that you're saying, right, the competition,
Right.
if you're actually fighting for your rights, I think that'll still be a good stance to have. So let's say in India, like 377
Mhm.
just went away a few years back. When you were
Mhm.
fighting for the gay right movement or the LGBT community, I think that was the right stance to have in that case. And
Right.
it's not to say that it is uh, this should be your stance in all the cases, but then in cases like this where you're fighting for your rights, or something where you know that you are doing the right thing, or standing up for something that is principally correct, let's put it that way, and yeah,
Uh-huh.
I'll still be happy if that happens.
Absolutely. I think you make a very fair point, and I'm completely on board with what you're saying. What I do find, and I'm thinking more of, work setups,
Yeah.
is it tends to fester a bit, and it takes multiple attempts to really resolve the conflict. It keeps coming up from time to time. It's not laid to rest very easily. So maybe from that perspective, it can be a very challenging stance to take at work. But I
Yeah.
completely agree, standing up for your beliefs, for your rights. There are places where some things are right and some things are not.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm totally with you. On the other end of the spectrum, I would say is accommodating, where you're approaching conflict with the intention to, uh, let the other person win, right? It's a form of avoidance, I would say. You are resolving it in some way, but you're completely giving up your stance, right?
Mm.
Um, you're not really sticking to your guns. You're not fighting for your beliefs, your cause, your principles. So that also I feel is not something that resolves the conflict really. I think it
Mm.
tends to rear up from time to time. But I would say that, I have examples of where I have used it, and it is when I'm sometimes trying to pick my battles, right?
Yeah.
I'm making big changes. Let's say we're doing a transformation, and there are 100 things where we're trying to, challenge status quo and do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot really eat the entire pie in one bite. So sometimes certain conflicts I may accommodate the other person's view, even if I'm not in full agreement, with the intention of circling back to it at a more opportune time, or when the conditions are better, or give that person some time to digest the variety of opinions. So it
Mm-hmm.
is something that I would use as an intermediate sort of stage.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you have any examples you want to share, Vishal?
So I do. So when, for me, accommodating, the best place I can think of is when we are talking processes, right? So let's say if you're
Mhm.
establishing processes,
Mhm.
and I have a slightly different idea, or my team has a slightly different idea of a process versus, let's say, someone else, a client or someone. As long as the outcome is the same, at least in both of our heads, I can give up
Mhm.
my process. I mean, I'm not that attached to a process as long as the outcome that we're expecting is the same. So yeah, even though there will be like conflicting ideas of how the process has to be established, I'm happy to give up my space. as long as we know that, okay, we'll achieve the same thing.
Right. I think that's a great example. And I think that kind of rigidity in the weeds is
Mm.
anyway very questionable because uh, we're never going to get it right, right? So some sort of
Yeah.
flexibility over there makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Plus, I think
And then,
it's like a step towards building relationship. Every
right.
time you accommodate, because yeah, you do build a certain kind of relationship. Obviously, does this
Uh-huh.
not mean that you accommodate with everything, but spaces like
Right.
this where it does not affect your outcome. Sure, if you just give up
Right.
something, the other person actually feels a little bit closer to you. So yeah, it works out
Absolutely.
to be
I completely agree with you. And that's where, I would think of, choosing my battles. Is everything worth, winning, right?
yeah.
It's not. So, and then we have the gold standard collaborating. So that's where we are trying to blend ideas,
Mm,
have space to uh, collectively forge something together, and that's wonderful. It's a little bit of consensus building, a little bit of synthesization of ideas, and all of those things.
mhm,
I think on paper, I would say that sounds like the best response we could have to conflict, and also on the ground. So I don't mean to say that it's only in theory, but I think we should remember that it can be time consuming, right?
mhm,
Consensus building can take time. It
yeah.
also depends on how many people are involved and all of those things.
Mhm,
Over here, what can help us get to a more collaborative style of managing conflict could be excellent facilitation, somebody who's seen as neutral, somebody who knows how to draw out ideas, how to find the synergies, how to synthesize different thoughts.
mhm,
So facilitation can play a big role over here.
yep.
I think again, staying objective and talking about a topic instead of again putting your pride on the line or your ego on the line, I think can really help move forward.
Yeah.
So a lot of openness, focusing. I think I've also found that focusing on defining the problem well and not rushing into the solution space
Mhm,
allows more room for collaboration. So maybe an example over here could be that we were talking with a certain team about how we pick the next priority for the next quarter for us or whatever, right?
mhm,
So we started with a place where everybody was already coming in with solutions. Some people had a tool based solution. Some
right.
people were questioning why prioritization is such a big deal and all of those things. So, getting that group together, keeping the solutions aside, defining the problem, helped everybody come to a common starting point and then gradually build solutions from there. So, that was very collaborative, but we had a lot of openness from the group,
Mhm,
which allowed us to do. So, that's an example that I would cite, maybe.
right.
Mm. And then somewhere in the middle, we have compromising. And sometimes it can look like collaboration when you're compromising. So if you don't look too
Oh
closely,
no,
you'll, you
it's
know,
not. No, it's more like a terrorist negotiation. It's not collaboration. No.
so true. But it can masquerade as collaboration
Yeah.
where you think, okay, hey, we built consensus, but it's actually a compromise, and again, very likely to resurface sometime soon in the future.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah,
this,
so if I differentiate like the thing I spoke about accommodating, a compromise for me would be that I agree on someone else's process, but that means that the
uh-huh,
outcome will be mediocre. And that
right,
for me will be a compromise. And I wouldn't want to do that because I don't want the results to get hampered in any which way.
right,
Process, yeah, I'm fine with. I still understand compromise is a time when there are times when you will have to compromise. Obviously,
right.
it's a fair mode of conflict. What I do
Absolutely.
like is, especially with the collaboration aspect, I like the I like to capture expressions of people when I tell this to them the first time. You want to
Uh-huh.
collaborate, you know that's a conflict, and then I explain the TKI, and they are like amazed to know that okay, what we actually want to achieve is conflict, so we can't move away from conflicts. It is a part of what we want.
Right.
But then conflicts also have levels, right? So we have modes and then we have levels.
Mhm.
So when we say collaboration and the levels, I think Speed Reese, the person who defined the level of conflicts, The first two levels, which is the problem to solve and the disagreement,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think this will more or less sum up how the collaboration aspect of conflict works. Maybe not even that much with disagreement, but with problem to solve. But if I'm looking at a high performing team, they will most likely fluctuate between these two levels. So they will fluctuate between a problem to solve. They're very objective with the problem in hand, and there are
Mm-hmm.
disagreements, and there is a little bit of sarcasm at times, but they are still
Mm-hmm.
working towards solving like they're moving towards a purpose, as you said, like a common goal.
Right.
And that's the
Mm-hmm.
level where I would want to see a high performing team when it comes to the mode of conflict with collaboration, right?
So I agree with you. You know, the level of conflict when we are still talking about problem to solve,
Mhm.
the team is still focused on wanting to fix things. It's still collaborative. It's still objective. So
Mhm.
that's a very healthy space to be in. And I would say it's a pretty dominant trait that we would see on high performing teams.
Mhm.
I also agree with the fluctuation with disagreement, but the point I would watch out for in the disagreement level of conflict, so to speak, is that people tend to start becoming very careful, and there's a little
Yeah.
bit of wariness about how much they say in a public place. There's a lot of self protection that kicks in.
Mhm.
There could be a lot of offline conversations and offline modes of trying to, approach the conflict. So this would be something to watch out for, and it would be a time where a team could relook at the level of safety that they have in the team,
Mhm.
and try and work on that a little bit. But yes, these two levels of conflict are still fairly healthy. The team can handle it by themselves to a large extent, and it gets them to high performance.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, yeah. So the two levels, as you rightly said, the teams can most likely do everything by themselves. I wouldn't even want a leader to step in. But this wouldn't
Mhm.
be the truth the moment we start going like levels up, right? So let's say if we are on level three, which is more of a contest. For me, like winning is absolutely essential. As the example where you stated, I don't care what's going on, but my status is more important, and I have these many years of experience, and competition
Mhm.
overtakes everything else.
Right.
So the moment we are at level three, I think this is where it becomes important for the navigator of the conflict. I wouldn't call leader, but whoever is responsible for navigating through this conflict to understand, let's say, how much of energy are the parties bringing into the conflict, or what's the
Mhm.
language that they are using, or what kind of
Mhm.
complaints they are gathering. And all of this
Right.
direct towards what kind of a conflict is it and how I want to address it or how I should address it.
Right. And you're right, right? And not only, it's not about that specific conflict alone. Sometimes it builds up over time.
Hmm.
So, there could be multiple issues over time that are compounding to become larger and larger.
Yep.
It could be characterized by a lot of blaming and finger pointing.
Hmm.
You may also start to see some factions getting formed, starting to get formed at this stage,
Hmm.
where people are starting to choose sides and things like that. And you're right. I think a navigator, the role becomes a little more important, where leaving it to the teams may not be enough, too deeply entrenched in all of that. Um, Over here, maybe as a beginning, some form of negotiation or some form of compromise may help starting to break the ice a little bit. What do you think
Hmm.
about that? I like the idea of negotiating with terrorists too
Oh
much.
yeah, negotiating with terrorists, that's my favorite part. No, I mean, until level three, I think maybe you don't need anyone to navigate, right? I know level three is
Mhm.
still a little bit of personal attacks, and
Right.
uh, people may start taking sides. I wouldn't
Hmm.
say this is like still the level of people like take sides, but they you might
Right.
start seeing certain inclination.
Right.
Uh, I'm still happy if the leaders don't do anything until this point of
Mhm.
time. But if they do, Then they have to be a little careful, just ensure that they have observed enough, they have heard every party who's involved, because it's not
Mhm.
necessarily a conflict is just two people, right?
Right.
It can be multiple people, and
Right.
every person you speak with is one story that you hear. So
Right.
it's important that you get like an overall picture of everyone who's involved in the conflict, and then possibly you take certain actions. But the first action, as you said, is still correct.
Mhm.
Some kind of a compromise, maybe, or something, a step towards, first of all, de-escalate your current level
Yes.
and move more towards objectiveness, more towards the problem to solve kind of a level, and then see how things work out.
Right.
But all that changes the moment you go on level 4, right? So level 4 they call crusade. And I have this amazing example that happened to me. So actually it happened with me multiple times. uh,
Mhm.
we have this era of agile software development, right? And agile
Mhm.
for is something that I'm a big fan of.
Mhm.
uh, but the moment this movement, so called, that I address, not very happy about it, but let's call it a movement.
Yeah.
We now started getting into a phase where we want everyone in the organization to be agile, which isn't a
Right.
bad thing. Agility is a good thing. But now we suddenly want everyone to change. And now we are passionate about everyone to change, but maybe someone sitting in the finance department is not.
Mhm.
And if I have to go and convince someone in the finance department, usually one thing I would hear is, yeah, it works for software, it wouldn't work for finance. That for
Right.
me is like the starting point of level 4, which is like you're trying to safeguard your entire group. It's not just you now,
Uh-huh.
it's like the entire group who's
Right.
on one side, and you're like this outsider, and you're trying to
Uh-huh.
like now create like proper groupings and people taking sides about what should and should not happen. And yeah, level 4 is like amazing. I even like the name crusade because
Yes.
it pretty much gives you everything that you would want to see from, let's say, um, a nice little movie that you're
Right.
in. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I love the naming. It's so colorful. And I think it really gets the pulse of, what's going on. So it is a crusade. And we have beliefs and causes at this time,
Oh
right?
yeah.
We're trying to convert people over to our side. So absolutely. And I would say that, I would think that at this point of time, maybe all lines of communications have been burnt as well. So,
I
yeah.
hope not. I hope not. I mean, I still want to be like that diplomatic person, right? Who's trying to
Yeah.
bring in some kind of like a common buy-in. So I hope the communication lines are still there, but it will be difficult to identify those, I think.
So I would imagine that, maybe over here, I would see a bigger role for a navigator or a neutral sort of person to
Mhm.
come in and maybe be the diplomat. There is a lot of
Yeah.
space for diplomacy over here. So maybe somebody comes in to be the diplomat and sort of bring the groups back together. Somebody who's, I don't want to say carrying messages, but somebody is trying to bridge some of the gaps that have been formed because
Yeah.
people are now rallying around causes, so they're very deeply entrenched.
Mhm.
So I think breaking that probably needs a little more concerted and focused effort than the other three levels that we spoke about earlier.
Mhm. Yep, absolutely. Have you heard that like Donald Trump suddenly has become like this? He's very much interested in mediating nowadays. I've heard so
Yes.
many statements from him.
Yes, absolutely. So many conflicts, right? He was to mediate all conflicts, and but he's a mediator in waiting, I believe, because nobody seems to have taken him up on his offer
Man,
so
I
far.
wouldn't want him as a mediator, honestly. I mean, okay,
Right.
he may be good at business, and I'm not in his. I will avoid this conflict, Vinaya. Let's move on.
So I think
Yeah, but you do have level 5. Level 5 is called World War. There is no way to solve it. I
right.
mean, I like the marriage metaphor you said. World War and the marriage metaphor will probably be a divorce,
Yes.
and I'll say
Murder.
that that'll still be a nice thing, right? I mean, it's not bad if parties separate. It, as long as you can ensure that they are not hurting each other, it still is a good outcome. So I wouldn't consider like a separation being a bad thing. It still is a good thing as long as it leads to something better afterwards.
I'm completely with you on that. And I think, in a world war level conflict, sometimes more than just the involved parties suffer. So there's an entire large group of people paying the price for the conflict.
Mhm.
And I maybe, the cost of just fixing it is just too high.
Yeah,
And separating the conflicting parties could create environments where each conflicting party goes and flourishes by themselves, right? They don't have to do it together. They
yeah,
don't have to be locked into a space where there's no joy. So I think the larger good sometimes over here is the
yeah,
primary concern. So I'm with you on the metaphor as well. Separation and divorce sometimes could be the path to happiness, and why not, right?
yeah. I think a lot of the times when conflicts happen, and if people are aware of these levels and modes, um, anytime you start like noticing a conflict to appear, you start trying to level it somewhere, and you try to like bring in what is the right mode to address. It
Yeah.
is important to note that not everything is going to be like level 4 and level 5. These are still exceptions. I mean, okay,
Yes.
until level 3, you may still see it every now and then, even if it's a high performing team, because ultimately we are humans.
Yeah.
Having level 4, level 5 are still like exceptions. They wouldn't
Yeah.
be like your day to day thing. If it is, then it is a very toxic culture. And I hope that's not the case.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I completely agree. I think I've seen it very rarely,
Mm,
and it's usually again, it gets built up over time, and there are
yeah.
many other influencing factors that get certain conflicts to that stage. But I
Mm,
agree that it's also rare. But the first three we see often, if not every day, right?
yeah.
I think on some teams you see it every day, but again, like we said, we want healthy conflict. We want that is the way to high performance as well.
I mean, I think there's no question where uh, we can say that if you have to be a high performing team, you have to have conflicts. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
I think we have enough material to understand what makes a high performance team. We spoke about how we define high performance for teams. We did speak about the dysfunctions that teams can have and how these have to be overcome. We also discussed quite in detail about what conflicts is, and I think we are also running out of time. So before we leave, Vinaya, if I have to get your parting thoughts about high performing teams, what will that be?
Um, the conversation, I think it really helped me think of a lot of things and identify some things about myself for me, right? So a little bit of introspection to follow soon for myself. High performance, I would say, is something that can be targeted if we start with some level of alignment, with a lot of care along the way, because it's a
Mm,
long journey. And by continuously retrospecting and improvement, so inspect, adapt, all of those things, that's what's really going to get us on that journey.
mm,
Being familiar with the team development models, I think
mm.
it gives us a great tool for sense making because it's very complex. The way we
Right.
experience it is very complex. I think the models are simple. They give us some vocabulary to use to have these conversations, and they help us with some way of beginning to understand what's going on. So I think they are very invaluable from that point of view.
Mm,
Also, being familiar with and expecting certain dysfunctions on our teams can help us go in better prepared for some of the challenges. They can help us preempt some of the challenges, and really, accelerate our journey towards becoming these awesome teams.
right.
And lastly, conflict, right? Conflict as a means to grow. To grow the team is awesome. But knowing the nuances can really help us have a better response. So it's a worthy cause, speaking the language of crusades. but it's a worthy cause. So we can give it our best, and we should also know when to pull back and let things slide a bit. So it's all like this intricate dance that we're playing, but I think knowing all of these things helps us navigate the whole landscape a little better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Vinaya, thank you so much for being my guest. It was really, really awesome speaking with you. And hopefully we can collaborate again in the future. I'll love to have one more.
I'd love to do that anytime.
That was Vinaya Murlidharan sharing the building blocks of high performance teams. Hope this episode was just as educational for you as it was for me. And we did speak quite a bit about leadership, so in the next episode, I'll be speaking with our agile amigo Shri Harsha about extreme ownership where everyone is a leader. For more of Enterprise Joy, subscribe to wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube so you don't miss any episode. Patrons on patreon.com/enterprisejoy get some exclusive benefits, so do check out what we have to offer. The details of our upcoming episodes can be found on our website enterprisejoy.com, and you can send your feedback and comments to vishal@enterprisejoy.com so our podcast can continuously improve. So until next time, thank you for listening to this podcast. Take care and stay safe.